Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the part 1 of What If Deku Had More Than One Soulmark. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Midoriya noticed it a few days ago after class. It was so small at first he just thought it was another freckle on his hand, at least until it started to get bigger and change color. The moment he realized what it meant, his stomach twisted with anxiety, embarrassment, and oddly enough, excitement. At this point, he wasn't sure how he'd handle anyone else finding out just yet. The plan was to keep it to himself, at least for a little while, but of course with his luck, he barely made it a day before someone found out. Holy see, you have a soul mark. Blood splattered from Toshinori's mouth the moment he caught sight of it, the shock sending him into a coughing fit. He doubled over, pain shooting up his bandaged abdomen. Midoriya quickly pulled his hand away from Recovery Girl as if he'd been shocked by lightning and screamed, hiding his face as he turned bright red. As eloquent as ever, All Might. Chio turned to the coughing man with a stern look before pulling Midoriya's hand free to get back to her work. It did little to stop the boy from wrapping his other arm around his face in an attempt to hide. Please find some restraint. You're going to reopen your wounds and you startled this poor boy when I haven't even finished patching him up. I'm sorry, I got a little too excited. Toshinori breathed between coughs, wiping blood from his mouth and glanced at the boy sympathetically. In the time he's gotten to know Midoriya, he really shouldn't have expected anything less than this kind of reaction. All Might, really that is no excuse. You don't just go blurting out about something this personal, Chio huffed, shaking her head. I did my best to respect Midoriya's privacy when I first noticed his mark. You knew. Midoriya squawked, daring to peek out from behind the safety of his arm. It's not difficult to notice the change when you've been coming here every day since classes began. She gave him a displeased look before she patted his bandaged hand tenderly. Maybe this will give you incentive to take better care of that hand of yours. Midoriya bit his lip, knowing he hasn't been doing a very good job, and his gaze dropped to his hand. The soul mark sat just below his knuckles, but strangely, it was like he could still sense it was there even though it was covered. It was a simple design. A few lines formed what looked like greenish-blue crystals. That wasn't a lot to go on for who it could possibly be. I don't know that it's just, I was hoping I could keep it to myself for a while. To think it through. Midoriya sighed and found himself staring at the ceiling. There hasn't been much time for that, has there? Toshinori sighed, glancing out the window of the infirmary. All the excitement had made him forget for a moment what they had just had to endure not even an hour ago. It had all been a close call, too close for comfort, the villains breaching their security and infiltrating the USA. His mind was still reeling after everything, but he found some comfort they were safe and even having this conversation at all. My mom doesn't even know yet, Midoriya gasped, as if it's the first time it's really occurred to him. Oh God, when she finds out I'm never going to hear the end of it. He tugs at his hair and could practically hear her shrieking already. Don't worry about it, dear. Chio said with a sympathetic smile. You can count on us to be discreet from now on. Isn't that right, All Might? She turned to give him a pointed look. All right. My lips are sealed. Toshinori rubbed his head nervously and glanced back down at her. She jerked her head slightly towards Midoriya, gesturing him to say something. Words of encouragement. Everything's going to be okay. Thanks. He let out a soft sigh, but the worry wouldn't leave his face. So, any thoughts on who it could be? Toshinori couldn't for the life of him hide his grin. If you don't mind sharing, that is, he added quickly. Well, I've given it a little thought. Midoriya's face heated up and he traced a finger over his bandages absently. Since it's still pretty small, I think it has to be someone I met after coming to UA. Makes sense. A new environment also means meeting a lot of new people. Toshinori hummed. Could it be one of your friends? Midoriya squeaked and turned bright red. No. I mean, I only have a couple and they're just friends. I'm sure of it, I think. Toshinori laughed and leaned over to give the boy a pat on the head. Well, I guess your best shot at finding out is waiting for your mark to change again. Just keep an eye on it and who you're talking to. You'll figure it out sooner or later. That's what I'm worried about, Midoriya whined, running his hand through his hair. This is so frustrating. Knowing that he stopped short, finding it difficult to actually say it. I don't even know who it is yet, and even if I do find out, then what? You have your entire life ahead of you to find out, dear. Chio shook her head. It won't kill you not knowing for a little while longer. You don't need to decide anything right now if you aren't ready. I guess you're right. Midoriya sighed, though he didn't seem convinced. All right then, I'll give you two some space. Chio hummed, heading out and stopping by the door. I'll be back in a little while to check in on you too. Get some rest. She added sternly. Yes, ma'am, they spoke up, sitting up a little straighter. The two of you are too alike for your own good, she sighed, but a small smile curled on her lips as she turned to leave. A silence fell between the two of them. Neither of them really sure what to do or say. Eventually, Midoriya found himself glancing over at All Might. Well, maybe more like staring, but Midoriya couldn't help but scan for any bit of exposed skin and wonder. The public had almost no information about All Might's personal life. It was one of his most well-kept secrets, along with one for all. Every time he was asked about it, no one really got the answers they were really looking for. So, All Might, you've got to tell us. An older news clip came to mind. Anyone special out there? Why, I really shouldn't say it, All Might chuckled, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. Oh, come on, not even a little hint? The host insisted. There must be someone out there made just for you. Well, okay, I'll let you in on the secret. All Might chuckled and leaned in closer. Everyone waiting with bated breaths. Justice is my soulmate. But she is not a kind as, and yet I still love her. While it may have not been what they wanted, the audience still roared with laughter. If All Might made a habit of keeping one for all a secret with humor, did that mean he did the same about his soulmate? Midoriya's eyes widened. Wait, was he onto something, or? For all he knew, his Soulmark could be covered by his bandages, or somewhere people wouldn't see it. During their training at the beach, Midoriya remembered All Might had a one-piece swimsuit. That couldn't be a coincidence, right? So maybe it could be on his chest or back maybe? Looking back, Midoriya couldn't think of a time All Might's never worn anything or his hero costume tearing to reveal anything. Kid? You're starting to creep me out. Toshinori raised an eyebrow. The staring was already weird enough, but now he was starting to mutter. Knock it off. Sorry. Midoriya waved his hands frantically and turned away embarrassed. It's just that I was just wondering, he should just say it was only fair with. How All Might had pointed his out earlier, right? Do you have a Soulmark, All Might? Toshinori stared at him, his expression unreadable before he turned away wordlessly. A shadow cast over his face and he brought his hand up to cradle his side. I guess it was natural for you to be curious, but there isn't really anything left of it to see. Midoriya stared at his side and his breath hitched. It was hard to forget, seeing his scar for the first time. The skin was so damaged and discolored, he couldn't even remember seeing anything that remotely resembled a Soulmark. If one had been there before, it must have been completely destroyed when he'd been injured all those years ago. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Hey, it's okay. You didn't know. Toshinori closed his eyes and let out a sigh. It's just, some villains are sick enough to use these marks against heroes to hit where it hurts. For your safety, I suggest keeping yours covered in the field. Midoriya nodded without a word. He could see the logic. Their line of work was dangerous and villains would use any means to get the upper hand. When he had the courage to look up again, he was surprised to see All Might had a faraway look in his eyes. There was a pain and loneliness in his gaze. Something Midoriya hasn't seen since the first time they met on that roof. What about did something happen to your soulmate? Midoriya asked, resting his hand over his own mark. What? Oh, we're not on speaking terms anymore. Toshinori closed his eyes and struggled to find the right words. Instead, all he could hear in his mind were those last harsh words that couldn't be taken back. Sometimes this soulmate stuff doesn't work out. Oh. Midoriya looked away again, unsure of what else to say. Don't worry about me, kid. It happened a long time ago. Soulmarks were known to fade. Toshinori wasn't sure what would have happened to his, but maybe it was easier not knowing. I'm sorry for bringing this stuff up now. You've got enough going on as it is. No, it's fine, Midoriya tried to argue. Still, that it couldn't have been an easy thing to deal with. Toshinori took a chance to look over at the young boy and winced. He looked lost, like Midoriya was unsure what to say or do, not that he blamed him. Toshinori hadn't intended to derail things like this. He had to think of something. He couldn't just leave things like this. Before he could think of anything inspiring or helpful, Midoriya quickly stood up from his bed, but almost immediately lost his balance. Hey, what are you doing? Toshinori shot his arm up, quick enough to catch him. Underestimating how much my legs feel like jelly. Midoriya looked at him apologetically. If you need me to come over to you, you could have asked. Toshinori sighed and helped him to his side. Sorry, you're right. Midoriya grimaced as he sat down. If Recovery Girl saw you, we wouldn't hear the end of it. Toshinori shook his head, unsure what he was going to do with this boy. So, what is it? Midoriya stared at him like he was looking for something. Toshinori wasn't sure what to make of his behavior until the boy reached up and rested his hand on the older man's head. Toshinori was taken aback at first and unsure of what to do. Sorry if this is weird, Midoriya said as he pulled his hand away. It's just, you do this for me when I need cheering up and you always do so much for me. I just wanted to let you know I'm here for you too, like you're always here for me. Toshinori suddenly pulls Midoriya into a tight embrace, or as tightly as their injuries would allow it. It's not weird, kid. A soft laugh echoed in his ear while that same hand ran his fingers through his hair again. Midoriya was at a loss for words, but did his best to return the hug. It was a little awkward with their arms pressed uncomfortably into bruises and aching muscles, but neither of them seemed to mind too much. Thank you, for everything. Toshinori finally said, holding him a little tighter. His side ached painfully, but he ignored it. You've done so much more for me than you'll ever know. You can't tell him. You're welcome. Midoriya turned his head to try to look at him, but his bangs kept his face hidden. Is everything okay? I'm running out of time. I'm sorry, it's just been one of those days, I guess. Another close call. There were too many. It was only a matter of time now. He took a breath and pulled away and offered a small smile. Let's not make it a habit of getting into too many, all right? Agreed, Midoriya laughed nervously. Though, now that he could see his face, he couldn't shake the feeling that tugged at his heart. All Might was smiling, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. What are the two of you doing up? Chio yelled as the door smacked open. Detective Naosama stood behind her unsure what to do as the older woman stormed inside to scold the two. Naomasa watched Toshinori and Midoriya scramble to find an excuse, but there was little they could do against Recovery Girl's wrath. Once the storm had calmed and the two were back in their proper places, Naosama dared to enter the room and offered his friend a sympathetic look. Hi, Toshinori. Been a while. He gave him a sheepish wave. Blood sputtered out of Toshinori's mouth at the sight of his old friend. Once he recovered from his initial shock, the two began to talk about the recent events at the USJ. Naosama hadn't stayed for long, only long enough to ask a few questions and answer a few of Toshinori's. Midoriya couldn't help but watch them while they talked. All Might mention something about Naomasa being someone he trusted and a friend. Then, while they two were speaking, Midoriya couldn't help but notice how relaxed All Might was around Naomasa. Well, it was more All Might had his guard down around him and just looked tired, and he wasn't trying to hide it. It reminded Midoriya of All Might's smile from before Naomasa arrived. All Might may have been smiling, but there was a deep sadness and pain in his eyes. It must have been something only a handful of people were able to get this close to ever see. And 3 of them were in this room. It still surprised Midoriya sometimes that he was one of those people now. How many people did that leave that were allowed to see this side of him? When Naomasa left, the two were ordered to get some rest, but Midoriya's thoughts still wandered. He found himself glancing over at All Might. The hero's eyes were closed and his chest moved with each breath as he drifted off in no time. The day's events were finally catching up to him. It was these quiet moments, Midoriya thinks, where he saw a completely different side of his hero. It wasn't an act, or a mask, or a brave face. Just him. Even so, back when they'd first met, All Might had told him he smiled to hide his fear. Was that still true? Before he could find an answer, Midoriya's own eyes felt heavy. He decided not to fight the sleep his body desperately needed anymore. The next thing Midoriya knew, he was being stirred awake by a hand gently stroking his hair. He mumbled under his breath about giving him 5 more minutes or something like that, but was met with a laugh instead. "Sorry to wake you, kid." Toshinori ruffled Midoriya's green curls. "I have some things I need to take care of before I head out. Make sure to get some rest and get home safely." "You too." Midoriya mumbled tiredly, leaning into his hand. Toshinori's expression softened. The small gesture pulled at his heartstrings. Chio chuckled as she watched the two. Now, don't fall back asleep. It's getting late. You should be fine now to make your way home." Midoriya whined before he forced himself to sit up and yawned. Toshinori watched him fondly, before he started making his way to the door, but Chio stopped him, gestured for him to lean in closer. "You need to take better care of yourself, Toshinori. For your sake and for Midoriya." I know." Toshinori sighed softly and glanced back at the boy while he got ready, only to notice when the boy had stopped to stare at his bandaged hand again. Toshinori could tell, despite everything that's happened, all this soulmate stuff still weighed heavily in Midoriya's mind. There was never a moment where a million things weren't going through his head. Whether it be his training or studies, something was always on his mind. Regardless, he knew Midoriya always had been quick to make plans to overcome any obstacle in his path. However, emotions like this complicated things. It was definitely a new challenge he'd have to face. Midoriya might never fully be prepared, but that didn't mean Toshinori couldn't try to help him. "Midoriya, I know you have a lot on your plate right now." Toshinori spoke up softly. "That's an understatement." Midoriya gave him a sheepish smile as he looked up from his hand. "Let an old man give you some advice, my boy," Toshinori said with a small smile, afraid of what could happen if he didn't say anything here and now. "Your Soulmark, it's good you found out you have someone out there. Don't let a sad story like mine cloud your judgment. In the end, whatever decision you make is up to you." It made Toshinori feel a little guilty that he couldn't exactly encourage Midoriya with his own story, given he didn't have a happy ending. That didn't mean Midoriya couldn't have his own. "Oh, right." Midoriya looked away a little embarrassed, his face turning red. "Don't let something like this pass you by. This time of your life when you find your soulmate, it's always hectic. Emotions going haywire." Toshinori chuckled softly while Chio nodded beside him. "You're going to be feeling a lot of new things. You might even think you're going crazy, but that's part of the experience." Midoriya only got redder and Toshinori suddenly felt a little embarrassed himself. Toshinori quickly cleared his throat and brushed back his hair to distract himself. He wanted to get to his point before he accidentally said anything that would make things even more embarrassing for both of them. Whatever the case, you'll just have to roll with it and see where it takes you." Toshinori may have many regrets about what happened to him and Mirai, but there were still things he was glad he experienced in their time together. You never know what will happen until you take that leap forward. For what it's worth, I hope everything works out for you in the end, Midoriya. "I'd thank you, All Might." Midoriya gave him a weak smile before taking a deep breath, "for telling me your story and everything else. It makes me feel a little better, oddly enough." Toshinori nodded with a smile before turning to head out, and Midoriya watched him go with a sigh. All Might was right. There was so much he hadn't experienced yet. He couldn't stand back and let something like this slip past him. It wouldn't help him if he got worked up by what could or couldn't happen. "Thank you for all your help." Midoriya turned back to Recovery Girl once he was ready to go. "Take care, dear. Be safe on your way home." She smiled. "And good luck." Midoriya smiled and nodded before he made his way down the hall, but he felt a burst of energy and found himself running the rest of the way to the school's entrance. He was surprised, but happy to see Ida and Uraraka had waited for him to head home. After the day they had, filled with emotional turmoil and near-death experiences, he was glad they were okay and appreciated the company. Though, Midoriya found himself unable to make much conversation on the way back. Instead, his thoughts went back to his Soulmark. Should he just tell them now? They were his closest friends and he could trust them, right? Midoriya's face burned up and he turned to face the window. Would it be weird to ask them if either of them could be his soulmate? No, yes, definitely weird. What was he thinking? But he could always ask to be sure and ignore how mortifying asking outright would be. Though, if neither of them were his soulmate, he'd be back at square one. His thoughts began to swirl and he felt like he was going to explode. Ugh, school's been so crazy. Uraraka sighed. I was hoping there was more to talk about and deal with than almost getting expelled or getting attacked by villains. Don't you dare, Midoriya told himself, but the words left his lips before he could stop himself. I have a Soulmark. He blurted out, burying his face in his hands. Why did he just say that? Well, this was definitely happening now. Ida and Uraraka stared at him stunned. In his defense, Uraraka did want something to talk about, but why did he have to say that? A few seconds ticked by and Midoriya wondered if there was any way to open the doors of this moving train and leap out to escape this torment. Deku, I can't believe it. I'm so happy for you. Uraraka finally shrieked and hugged him tightly. Midoriya sighed in relief and felt some of the tension leave him. Uraraka, calm down, you're making a scene, Ida scolded her. Oh, relax, Ida. There's, like, no one in this train cart, she argued before she grinned at Midoriya. Let me see it. Let me see it. I can't. It's on my hand. Midoriya replied once he got back some brain function and raised his bandaged hand for her to see. It's pretty small right now, it kinda looks like crystals. Oh, well, show it to us when you can take those off. Uraraka smiled as she pulled away, ruffling his hair teasingly. Do you know who it is yet? Ida asked curiously, cupping his chin. No, not yet. Midoriya looked away, his blush grew darker. If I'm being honest, I'm super nervous about this whole thing and didn't really think it through, but I was kind of hoping I checked with you two first. Smooth, getting right to it then. Oh, of course. I'll let you know once I know anything. Ida chuckled at Midoriya's bashfulness, though his cheeks turned a little pink. He glanced over at Uraraka. He was puzzled when he noticed how quiet she'd gotten. Is something wrong, Uraraka? Thought I wasn't sure how to tell you guys, but I already know who my soulmate is. Uraraka cupped the sides of her face, turning bright red and avoided looking at them. I kinda just found out recently too, it wasn't really anyone I expected either. Congratulations, Uraraka. Ida exclaimed, clasping his hand on her shoulder while Midoriya stared at her in surprise. Yeah. Midoriya added quickly. Congrats, but who is it? I think it'd just be easier to show you. Uraraka sighed and raised her hand. On her palm was a small triangle with fire coming out from the middle. The way it spread out past the edges of the shape made it look very much like an explosion. Ida and Midoriya stared at it and their minds went blank. No, it couldn't be. Earlier that week. Round face. Bakugo gawked, staring down at her with wide eyes. The hell are you doing? Put me down. You don't need to shout. Besides, you almost walked into traffic. Uraraka yelled back at him, pulling him down to the ground before releasing her quirk. Thank you would be. Nice. You have a death grip, Bakugo scowled, rubbing his arm when he froze and quickly covered his arm. Show me your hand. Uraraka looked at him confused before she looked down at her palm. There was a simple triangle she did not remember having this morning with fire practically exploded from the middle. There was a moment of silence between them until they finally dared to look up at each other again. No, this isn't right. Bakugo spat out while he clutched his arm as if to keep it away from her. If anyone, you must be Deku's soulmate. You nerds are perfect for each other. It looks like a firecracker. Uraraka yelled back. It literally just changed in front of us. They both looked at it again, but it was still changing. Moments later the mark settled so that there was smoke on the edges. Bakugo gripped his arm tighter, and Uraraka stared at him. Let me see it. Not here. Bakugo snapped before cursing to himself. We need to find a place to talk. Now. Bakugo kept his pace ahead of her, not bothering to make sure if she could keep up. Uraraka had to jog a bit to catch up with him a few times. They weren't really walking together, but not exactly apart either. The silence only seemed to make things even more awkward. They somehow found themselves in a small cafe not too far from the campus. Luckily, no one they knew was there, so they took a corner table and hoped to be left alone. They sat there and waited for their drinks, unsure of what to do or say. Uraraka opened her mouth to say something, but stopped short when their drinks arrived. Here you are, you two. Is this your first time here? A cheerful man with skin made of bark and vine hair offered them a warm smile as he set down their drinks. Then turned his attention to Bakugo. Can I get anything else for you and your girlfriend? She's not my… Bakugo snapped before abruptly glancing at Uraraka with a light blush, then glared at his drink. The whole cafe became silent and Uraraka could feel a few people were staring. No thank you. Sorry about that. Uraraka said quietly to the stunned man. Bakugo's outburst startled the poor guy enough that a few flower buds sprouted in his hair. The man backed away, excusing himself, more than happy to leave them be. Uraraka glanced up at Bakugo, who was still glaring at his drink. That was new. She expected him to go completely off on that plant guy, but instead Bakugo just looked really flustered. Neither of them relaxed until conversations picked up in the cafe again. Uraraka was sure she could hear a few people muttering about them. What the hell is this? Bakugo asked flatly and gestured to his drink. Oh, they were out of what you wanted, so I got 2 orders of bubble tea, Uraraka replied as she took a sip of her drink. Try it. See if you like it. Bakugo stared at it skeptically and picked up the drink. He took a big gulp and nearly choked on the tapioca ball. What the F dash? What's in this? Don't drink it so fast. They're jelly pearls. It's supposed to be there. Uraraka winced, noticing more people gave them dirty looks. Sorry, I should have warned you. Bakugo muttered under his breath once he managed to clear his throat. He glared out the window and slowly started to sip his drink, much to Uraraka's surprise. She figured he must have been more startled at first than anything else, so he must have liked it if he was still drinking it. She doubted he'd admit it though. Do you hate me? Uraraka couldn't help but ask. Things still felt really awkward. She was sure they both had the same thought. Why you? I hardly know you. Bakugo set his drink down. He looked around to make sure no one was around and pulled up his sleeve to show her his Soulmark. That's the problem with all this. Uraraka peered over and saw a small jagged triangle on his forearm. Inside was what looked like a galaxy with purples, pinks and blue. She could only assume it was supposed to represent her gravity quirk. When she looked back up at him, she noticed he was glaring at the mark. This is all fairy tale bullshit, Bakugo spat, pulling his sleeve down and crossed his arms. I don't really believe in all this soulmate stuff. Take it with a grain of salt for what this means for us. Oh. Uraraka couldn't help but feel dejected, and she stirred her drink to distract herself. This was going well. But you believe it, don't you? Bakugo asked. He didn't plan to say anything else. If anything, he wanted to get up and leave, but the look on her face kept him in his seat. Your parents are soulmates, right? Yeah, they are. Uraraka replied, not sure where he was going with this. Figured. So, are they happy together? He asked, taking a sip of his drink. Yeah, of course they are. Uraraka couldn't think of a time when they were ever apart for long. They were both very happy and supportive of each other and have had a long marriage. My parents aren't soulmates, no soulmarks, nothing, but that doesn't stop them from being pretty happy together to the point it's annoying. Bakugo found himself staring out at the window. I just hate the thought of being told what to do, who to love, by anyone. Especially fate, destiny, whatever you want to call it. That's a decision I want to be able to make on my own. Uraraka looked at him in surprise. She hadn't expected this to be the direction the conversation would take, although not wanting his life to be predestined felt very much like Bakugo. She wasn't sure how to explain it since they barely knew each other. I understand. Still, it's not something you get to just decide on your own, Uraraka replied firmly. I still have a say in this, and it's still going to be a decision we both have to make in the end. Bakugo started to glare harshly at a speck on the window, then glanced back at her with a smirk. You don't want to FING date me. I'm a handful. I've got 2 hands, Uraraka said without thinking. She froze when she realized what she said, and Bakugo stared back just as shocked, his cheeks turning red. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't mean I don't want to try to get to know you first. Fine. Bakugo leaned on his elbow, resting his chin on his palm, as he turned to look at anywhere but her. Don't push it, it's not like we're getting married tomorrow or anything. I know. Uraraka felt her face heat up, and she covered her face. When she looked back up at him again, she noticed he looked lost in thought. She was about to ask him what was wrong when he got up and spoke. Some normal relationships work out just fine without destiny telling them who to love. Bakugo said, looking down at her, and Uraraka suddenly felt a lot smaller. How different is it really from an existence where no one had their soulmates assigned? It's effort and commitment that leads to things turning out okay. With that, Bakugo was gone, and Uraraka was left alone to think about his words. She stared at his empty seat and noticed he'd taken his bubble tea with him. So he did like it. Present. I didn't expect Bakugo of all people to be mature about all this. Ida finally spoke up after hearing what had happened, his hand on chin as he considered everything. Though I'm not surprised he didn't take well to be bound by fate. Sure sounds like him. Midoriya sighed, still trying to wrap his head around what happened. Okay, now that you two know, just, keep it quiet for now? Uraraka waved her arms around frantically. I'm still figuring it all out and would appreciate if the class didn't start teasing us. Ida rested his hand on her shoulder and smiled. You have my word. Yeah, don't worry about it. I understand what you're feeling. Deku smiled weakly. All this soulmate stuff was nerve-wracking and a lot to handle on top of everything else. Thanks, guys. Uraraka sighed and turned to Midoriya to give him a reassuring smile. Still, I hope this doesn't make things awkward between us, Deku. I really appreciate you. You're one of my closest friends. Well, whatever happens, I hope everything turns out okay for you too. Kacchan and I need to settle this thing between us, sooner or later. I just hope it doesn't get in the way of anything, Midoriya said firmly. He didn't want to go back on his word. There was some good in Bakugo, deep down, and Uraraka was the most positive person he's ever met, so maybe this was a good thing. Thanks, Deku. It's not fair the way Bakugo treats you, whatever that's all about, but I hope things work out for you too, Uraraka replied and smiled warmly. Thanks, but still, for you and Bakugo at least, things might be a little rough around the edges, but you'll just have to roll with it and see where it takes you. You never know what will happen until you take that leap forward, Midoriya said before he noticed Uraraka and Ida staring at him. He started to sweat. Did he say something weird? Such wisdom, Midoriya. Ida nodded in approval. And to think you've only just gotten your Soulmark as well. I commend you. Yeah, Deku. Uraraka smiled. It actually makes me feel a little better. This must not be an easy situation to be in, considering your rivalry with Bakugo. However, despite it, you are a kind friend, Ida added. Oh, no problem. Midoriya couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. It's just, someone I really trust just gave me that advice. Hey, you told someone before us? Uraraka pouted. That's not fair. Who is it? No one. I mean. Midoriya panicked as the train came to a stop at the next station. Well, this is my spot, see you guys later. He bolted out before either of them could stop him and sighed in relief at his luck. Hey, don't run. You'll strain yourself. Ida called after him, sticking halfway out the door. I'll inform you if I find a Soulmark. Oh, right, thanks, Ida. Midoriya blushed, slowing down at the top of the stairs to the station and turned back to look at them with a smile. Bye, Deku. Take care. Uraraka popped up beside Ida to wave. See ya. Midoriya said quietly and managed a small wave of goodbye before the doors closed. He watched the train leave until they were out of sight before he headed down the stairs. Midoriya is a good friend. Ida took his seat again. So, you wouldn't mind it if you end up as soulmates? Uraraka teased as she sat down beside him. I mean, I don't think I'd mind if it were the case. Ida looked away flustered. I haven't really given something like this thought. I haven't really felt like that towards anyone before, but if it's Midoriya I don't think I'd mind. Heh, I guess that's fair, Uraraka admitted and rested her chin on her hand. If things do work out somehow between me and Bakugo, I won't stand for him treating Deku like dirt. I have no doubt. Ida smiled at her fondly. I'm not a fan of Bakugo's hostility towards Midoriya. I can't imagine the cause for it. Maybe Deku stole his machi when they were little, Uraraka joked, and he's never let it go since. Perhaps, though it must have happened more than once to build Bakugo's endless rage. Ida couldn't help but tease back, and the two shared a laugh. You know, if platonic soulmates were a thing, I think you and Deku would be mine. Uraraka smiled sweetly. Ida returned the smile. The three of us have become very close in a short amount of time, Ida replied. It was very easy to feel at ease around the two of them. I'm going to have to agree with you. Uraraka let out a content sigh, and the two fell into a comfortable silence. She let herself look out the window and watched the city pass her while her thoughts drifted back to Bakugo. She was already so close to Ida and Deku, and she wasn't even sure if Bakugo even liked her. When she thought back, she remembered feeling so relieved the moment she saw that Bakugo was alright after USJ attack. On the other hand, he just sort of glared at her when they made eye contact. She wondered if he really hated her and all this soulmate stuff, especially since he seemed to make it very clear at the cafe. Bakugo absently poked at his dinner while his parents chatted. He occasionally glanced over at them, their hands resting over one another's on the table. His parents had already given up asking him about what had happened during the USJ attack and if he was alright. He was fine, it happened and it was over. It wasn't something he wanted to talk about, not when he had something else on his mind. Bakugo hated that his first instinct after the attack was to look for Uraraka. There had been a tightness in his chest the moment the class had been separated that didn't go away until he saw her standing with the rest of the class. It made him angry how relieved he felt in that moment. At least she's okay. Bakugo muttered, looking away when he noticed she looked back at him. She didn't even look injured. What was that, Bakugo? Kirishima asked curiously. Nothing. Mind your own demon business. Bakugo snapped. Okay, geez, calm down, buddy. Kirishima said, wanting Bakugo to take it down a few notches. I am not your buddy. Bakugo snapped again. Sure. Kirishima glanced up in the direction Bakugo had been looking and his smirk grew to a toothy grin. Like you totally didn't just make sure Uraraka was okay. What's that about? Nothing. Just drop it. Bakugo forced the memory away and looked away from his parents' intertwined hands to glare at his dinner. He hated that this DMN Soulmark was making him feel things. Demon fate, making him feel worried for a girl he hardly knew. He tried to force back that feeling in the pit of his stomach that he needed to protect her or anything. Uraraka made it out alive, didn't she? She was fine on her own without him. Midoriya sat in his room, leaning over his desk while he absently doodled in his notes. He found himself redrawing his soul mark in the margins. It was strange that he could remember the details even when it was covered. At a glance, it looked like some sort of crystal. If Ida was his soulmate, what was it supposed to represent? Maybe his rigid and strict personality, like the structure of a crystal? He let out a long sigh and leaned back in his chair. Maybe he was overthinking things. He wouldn't know anything for sure until he heard the verdict from Ida. His phone began to vibrate, and Midoriya fumbled to grab it when he recognized Ida's name as the caller ID. Hello, Ida? Midoriya answered tentatively. This was the moment of truth. So, good evening, Midoriya. Ida paused and took a deep breath. Midoriya gripped his phone tighter. The suspense was killing him. I checked, and I don't appear to have a soul mark. I'm sorry. Oh, Midoriya replied, his mind going blank for a moment. I mean, it's nothing you have to apologize for. Looks like I'm back to square one again. Midoriya sighed tiredly and slouched over his desk to stare at the soul mark doodle in his notes. Still, I know you were eager to find out who it could be. I don't blame you for being disappointed. Ida said. If it means anything, I wouldn't have minded being your soulmate. Thank you. Midoriya's voice cracked. and he could feel his face heat up. Right back at you? Sorry, was that strange to say? Ida chuckled when he noticed how flustered Midoriya was. No, thanks, you're a good friend, Midoriya said, and he felt himself relax a little. We've come a long way since the entrance exams, Ida added thoughtfully. I'm sorry about back then. I realize now I may have been too stern with you. Maybe just a little bit. Midoriya smiled weakly. Regardless, I'm glad we both passed and have found a friendship out of this. Ida continued. Yeah, I feel the same, Midoriya agreed. It was much easier to talk to Ida now that they had started to get to know each other. To tell you the truth, this soulmate business has got me thinking. Ida let out a sigh. I'm not even entirely sure that I want someone in my life like that romantically, I mean. Oh, why is that? Midoriya asked and sat up. I'm not sure really. I've been teased in the past for not having any crushes or not feeling any kind of attraction to anyone, Ida replied. He was often called too serious as well by his peers. I suppose that's part of the reason why it's been difficult to connect with people outside of family. It's odd, I know. It's not, Midoriya said, relaxing back into his chair. I mean, I get it's hard to connect with people when they expect you to be a certain way. Yes, with you and Uraraka it feels different. Ida replied. Earlier, after you left, Uraraka called the three of us platonic soulmates, and it made me feel happy, like I had somewhere I belonged. Ever since he began at you, Ida had felt he could be more himself. He honestly felt just fine forming close bonds with others, and he was quite fond of his classmates. Perhaps the attack had made it clearer to him. I like the thought of us being platonic soulmates. Midoriya chuckled softly. I think it fits the three of us pretty well. I'm glad, Ida said fondly as he took off his glasses. I think I'm going to turn in for the night soon. Don't stay up too late and get some rest. Thanks, Mom. Midoriya snickered when Ida made a noise in protest. One more thing, Midoriya, Ida spoke up a little nervously. I'm not sure where I was going with all this. This is something I still want to figure out about myself, but I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry if I brought it up on you all of a sudden. No worries. Thank you for telling me, Ida. He was glad Ida felt comfortable enough to confide in him for something like this. Thank you for listening. Ida smiled and appreciated Midoriya's understanding. Oh, and good luck in your search for your soulmate. Whoever it is will be lucky to have you in their lives. Thanks. Midoriya chuckled softly. He made a vow to himself that when he figured out who his soulmate was, he wouldn't abandon Ida or make him feel ignored. He didn't deserve that kind of treatment. Good night and take care. Good night. Midoriya let out an annoyed sigh and tossed his phone on his desk. He ran his hands through his hair in frustration as he stared at the ceiling. Back to square one in his search, and now he didn't even have any leads. He raised his bandaged hand over his head and visualized the Soulmark. He thought it was some sort of crystal, but if it kept leading him to dead ends, he'd have to rethink the symbol. If it wasn't a crystal, what was it? You'd think fate would make it easier. Midoriya groaned at the vagueness of his mark. These marks usually represented the soulmate's quirk, but the mark didn't hint at a distinct quirk. So, if it wasn't a quirk, it could be symbolic. Who are you supposed to be? Shuto, will you be okay tomorrow? Fuyumi asked as she offered her younger brother a cup of tea. I overheard you and Dad talk earlier. He said he wanted to go over what happened today during your training. I'll be fine. Shuto took his cup and let his hand frost over to cool it enough to drink. Thank you, Fuyumi. Still, are you okay with reliving all that so soon? I'm sure you must have felt really scared, she said, sitting beside him at the table. Not really. He shrugged and took another sip of his drink. What? Shuto, you can't be serious. She looked at him surprised. Not even a little? If anything, the attack felt more like a nuisance, he admitted and rested his chin on his palm. Once he had gotten a grasp of the situation, he didn't feel a need to be scared. Fear would have only distracted him. I didn't let my guard down though, but most of the people I fought barely had any real combat experience. Sometimes it's hard to remember you're 15. Fuyumi looked at him, concerned. You know it's okay to feel scared, right? Don't worry about me, Fuyumi. I'm fine. He averted his eyes. There were few things that scared him. He didn't want any of that to affect him. I'm glad it's over. I had to get home to my sister after all. Alright, but if you need to talk, I'm here. Okay. She gave him a small smile and rested a hand over his. I know. Thank you. Shudo returned the smile before he finished his tea. I'm going to bed. It's been a long day. Alright, sweet dreams. Fuyumi sighed and watched him put his cup in the sink. Shudo nodded, then headed down the hall to his room. He didn't want to scare Fuyumi, but there were a few times that he truly did feel scared during the attack. Shudo stared in shock as Nomu broke free from his ice, losing an arm and a leg in the process. It should have been incapacitated it, but then his limbs regenerated in an instant and he stood up without a scratch. Before anyone registered what had happened, Nomu had lunged straight for Bakugo. He would have killed him had All Might not acted and thrown Bakugo to safety. It was in that moment that Shudo felt like he was looking at a real monster, something that seemed as if it couldn't be stopped and would kill anyone, even a child, if they were in its way. However, Shudo's fear had faded once All Might had taken Nomu out. It had been a relief to see that the monster was not as invincible as it made itself out to be. After that, all that was left for the rest of them was to deal with a few of the lesser villains who were coming back to their senses while All Might took out the last two real threats. Change of plans, looks like we're fighting after all. Kirishima called out and activated his quirk as the lesser villains started to regain their senses. Will you be joining us? Shudo turned back to look at Midoriya. Shudo tensed when he saw the absolute fear in Midoriya's eyes. He followed his gaze and saw his eyes were glued on All Might. Why was Midoriya so scared? By all means, it should have been an easy battle with Nomu out of the picture. It wasn't anything the symbol of peace couldn't handle, but when Shigaraki and Kurogiri lunged for him, All Might didn't move. Shudo felt the fear in him deepen, and he looked back at Midoriya. He couldn't help but wonder if there was something the rest of them couldn't see, but Midoriya could. Midoriya? Shudo tried to reach out for him, but a gust of wind blew past them and he was gone. Stay away from All Might. Midoriya screamed, and Shudo's eyes widened when he saw him jumping straight for the villains. But just before Midoriya was about to strike the mist villain, a wormhole opened, giving the villain beside him an opening to strike back. Midoriya! Shudo cried out, paralyzed with fear. One touch from his quirk and he'd be dead. What was he doing? Shudo had to do something, but he was too far, even for his quirk to reach. He wouldn't be fast enough to intervene. Why wasn't All Might moving? Why wasn't he helping Midoriya, who had been so ready to jump in to help him? A sudden hail of bullets shot from somewhere above them, and all hell broke loose. A shot struck the younger villain's hand, and Midoriya fell to the ground, injured, but alive. Shudo couldn't find it in himself to move or think clearly while the USJ filled with reinforcements, taking out the rest of the villains. Relief crashed through him like a truck, but his heart was raced like it would burst out of his chest. At least it was over now. The next thing Shudo knew, Kirishima was running to inform them they were supposed to head for the entrance. But what about? When Shudo looked back in the direction Kirishima had come from, he noticed a wall of cement where Midoriya and All Might had been. Without much of a choice, he followed the others. Once he was at the top of the stairs, he looked back down to the cement wall, but no one was there. It made him feel on edge for some reason. Shudo hadn't relaxed until Detective Naomasa had informed them that Midoriya and All Might were fine and would make a full recovery. Shudo let out a sigh when he closed the door to his room. There was so much that had happened that he was still trying to wrap his head around. He wasn't sure why he had froze like that. Was it the thought of almost seeing a classmate die and not being able to do anything to stop it? When he thought about it, that was probably the first time he'd spoken to Midoriya, but he'd still prefer if he didn't die. Midoriya. He wasn't sure what to make of him, really. His power was dangerous, both to himself and to others if he didn't control it. Though, Shudo had been impressed when he saw it on the first day of class. He'd heard about the entrance exam, but it was different experiencing it in person. There was that, but it was also that rush of air pressure when Midoriya had jumped forward. He had a very powerful quirk, but when it came down to it, what he did was stupid and reckless. He would have died had the other teachers not arrived in time. Though, Shudo didn't believe Midoriya was reckless without a good reason. Was All Might too injured to keep fighting? Shudo vaguely remembered seeing blood on his shirt. Perhaps it was a weak spot prone to damage? Whatever the case was, Midoriya saw he needed help and jumped, despite what it meant for himself. In an odd way, there was something inspiring about the way he'd gone out to assist someone without any hesitation. "You're something else, Midoriya. I'll give you that," Shudo muttered before he pulled off his shirt, revealing a series of branching black jagged lines with accents of red and pink on his upper left arm. "Sure is a nice night." Toshinori sighed deeply as he made his way home. It was a pleasant evening. It was hard to tell something so terrible had happened just hours earlier. He stopped to stare at the stars with a weary expression as the weight of the day really began to set in. It's been a hell of a day. There were too many close calls. It was just a matter of time now, wasn't it? He closed his eyes, shaking the thought from his head. For now, there were still a lot of people who looked up to him and needed him to stay strong. He owed it to them to keep moving forward and to make the most of the time he had left. Toshinori's gaze dropped to the building he'd stop in front of labeled Mizudafu Orphanage. He knew he shouldn't. That nagging voice in his head told him. He really ought to just go home and get some rest. Doctor's orders after all, but like he said, there were people who needed him. "Oh, Mr. Yagi, we didn't expect to see you so late," an elderly woman greeted him as he entered. "You were scheduled to come in this afternoon. The children kept asking about you." "Director Suzuki, I'm sorry. I know I should have called, but something came up." Toshinori rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "I was on my way home and wanted to drop by and check on the kids." Toshi, Mr. Scarecrow." Toshinori barely had time to brace himself when a half a dozen kids barreled into his legs. Miss Suzuki couldn't hold back a laugh as the poor man flailed his arms in an attempt to keep his balance. "Hey kids, sorry I'm so late." Toshinori laughed softly and patted a few of their heads. Mr. Scarecrow. Of all the things he's been called, it was that one that stuck. Back when he first started helping around the orphanage, the kids thought he was a scarecrow due to his appearance. At first it was because a few of them were afraid of him, but now. "Where were you today, Mr. Scarecrow?" Daisuke clung to his leg and tugged at the bottom of his shirt with a pout on his lip. "I told you he was okay." Ikuta lightly swatted Daisuke's arm with his sentient hair. Her hair tended to be more active when stressed, floating a few inches off her head as if she were underwater. "What happened to your face?" Shay, a girl with mint green hair, pointed to the bandages on his face. "Did you get into trouble?" Fuji floated up inches from his face. A pair of radiating wings fluttered behind her. Well, I was at my other job today, but things got a little hectic. There was a little trouble, but nothing Mr. Scarecrow couldn't handle." Toshinori replied, reaching out to pick up the girl. Fuji made a face, resting tiny hands on his face as she looked at his scrapes and bruises. "Mr. Scarecrow, did you hear what happened to All Might? Is he all right?" Daisuke tugged at his shirt again to get his attention. "Yeah, he's fine, just came from seeing him." Toshinori shifted Fuji in his arms so he could look down at the boy and gave him a thumbs up. "He wanted me to tell you guys he's going to be just fine." "Were you helping him deal with those villains?" Ryotaro asked, eyeing the other bandages peeking out from beneath his shirt. Yeah, these villains were a little tougher. Sometimes even heroes like All Might need help." Toshinori replied. At the orphanage, Mr. Scarecrow was a friend of All Might and had occasionally gotten him to visit the kids when he could. Though, some of the kids had started to notice that Toshinori was never there when All Might visited. At the time, he had to think of something quickly and said that Mr. Scarecrow was off fighting evil so All Might could have a chance to come visit them. Very heroic of Mr. Scarecrow, actually. Meanwhile, the kids were a bit skeptical that Mr. Scarecrow could fight hulking villains given how frail looked. "Why didn't the news mention you?" Ikuta asked. "Because Mr. Scarecrow works in the shadows," Toshinori teased, waving his hands around ominously. "What is your quirk anyway?" Ryotaro asked, crossing his arms. "Yeah, you never tell us." A few more children chimed in. "I'm very strong." Toshinori grinned, but kids stared at him, his noodle arms in particular, very skeptically. Oh, you don't believe me? His grin grew wider before he scooped them into his arms with ease. I'm stronger than I look. The children screeched in delight as Toshinori spun them around with ease. He laughed along with them until pain shot through his side and blood shot out of his mouth. He felt lightheaded and quickly had to set them back down. The children hovered around him worried, while Miss Suzuki shook her head as she tried to offer him help as he lapsed into a small coughing fit. Please. Try not to strain yourself, Mr. Yagi. Miss Suzuki sighed as she patted his back lightly. I'm fine, I'm fine. Toshinori spoke between coughs. It wasn't the first time they'd seen him like this, but he still tried to offer them a smile to let them know he was okay. Blood suddenly began to seep through his teeth. He might have overdid it. Toshinori found himself being ushered to the nurse's office with a stern look from the director to be looked over to make sure he didn't reopen any of his injuries. What have you been doing? Nurse Kyoko asked when Toshinori had pulled up his shirt and revealed his midsection and chest were covered in bandages. Blood was seeping through. Fighting bad guys. Toshinori shrugged sheepishly and Kyoko gave him a look. Is that what you're up to when you're not here? Miss Suzuki asked as Kyoko started to unwrap the bandages at his side. Once the bandages were gone, both were very surprised to see how much scar tissue was on his side. Toshinori said nothing and looked away, hoped they wouldn't ask about it. Thankfully, Kyoko worked silently to clean the injury and redress the wound. Sighing, Toshinori found himself glancing towards the door only to notice the kids huddled, watching him. He instinctively raised a hand to cover the scar from their view and looked away flustered. Is that a battle scar? Ryotaro couldn't help but point. How'd you get that? It looks like it really hurt. Daisuke added. It looks like a flower. Shay tilted her head. Toshinori looked at the young girl, surprised by her comment. He found himself looking at his scar. In a way it sort of did look like a flower, and he grimaced. A sunflower of all things. Did a villain get you? Another child asked. A long time ago, but a hero saved me. Toshinori closed his eyes. Children, you're supposed to be getting ready for dinner. Go on, Miss Suzuki motioned them with her hand. The children grumbled and pouted, looking between the director and Toshinori. Are you staying for dinner? Ikuta looked up at him hopefully. Toshinori chuckled. Well, if no one minds. Of course, you're always welcome here, Miss Suzuki sighed, giving him a worried look. But please don't strain yourself. I promise, he gave her a tired smile. He wasn't even sure he even had the energy left in him anyways. He turned his attention back to the children. Don't worry about me. Go get ready for dinner. I'll stay for a little while. Toshinori waved them off, glad to see their faces light up. Though, I'll need to go home and rest after fighting those bad guys. They were pretty strong. Mr. Scarecrow's so cool. He heard a few of the kids exclaim as they headed out. Toshinori watched them go with a fond smile. You aren't very discreet, are you, All Might? Miss Suzuki sighed once and Toshinori spat out blood in shock. He looked up at her, stunned, while Kyoko also gave him a knowing look. Oh, don't look so surprised. I helped raise you after all. Don't worry, your secret's safe with us. It wasn't that hard to figure out. Kyoko added as she wrapped his side with fresh bandages. Never here when All Might was showing up injured after villain attacks. The coincidences were starting to pile up. Usually my looks are enough to keep people from making the connections. Toshinori sighed as he wiped the blood from his mouth. What happened to you? Kyoko looked at him concerned. Toshinori was silent and gave the two a pained smile. I was hurt very badly, but I couldn't just stop being All Might. I had to go back in this. He gestures at himself, the consequences I have to deal with now. In the end it was like he did this to himself. I appreciated you came all this way to check on the kids, despite the day you've had, Toshinori. Ms. Suzuki rested a hand on his shoulder and smiled weakly. They kept asking about Mr. Scarecrow before any of us heard about the attack. You're important to them, just as much as All Might, if not more. I want you to remember that. You bring smiles to their faces each time you drop by, Kyoko added as she began to put away her supplies. So, take care of yourself. I will, he lowered his head. Recovery Girl had said the same thing. He needed to do better. Be better. Thank you. By the time Toshinori arrived to the dining hall, the children and caretakers were well underway setting up the room for dinner. He got to work setting out a few plates, skillfully moving around the children as they came and went. The first time he tried to help out, he nearly fell on his butt and tripped over them more than once and broke a few plates here and there. Now he moved and adjusted to the flow. Once they all settled down to sit for their meal, Toshinori found himself by several children as they all crowded in chairs around him. A few of the younger ones sat on his lap and ate with him. He listened to some of the kids' stories, mostly about how they've been or their favorite TV shows or heroes. Moments like this helped him forget his worries and reminded him what he was fighting to protect. It was nice. Toshinori reached over to pick up his drink, but knocked his fork off the table. Daisuke reached out, using his magnetism to catch the fork before it could hit the ground, and returned it to its spot beside Toshinori's plate. My hero, Toshinori chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. A gust of wind blew into his face as a little paper crane landed on top of Toshinori's head. He reached up to get a better look at it, and Shay tugged his sleeve. It's for you. Oh, thank you. I'll treasure it. He grinned, and she returned the smile as she used her quirk to float more paper cranes to the other caretakers. Toshinori watched fondly and looked over the group of children. He made a note to himself to bring Midoriya here. Yes, he'd already taught him service through cleaning the beach, and it also worked well with his physical training. This, however, could help him on a more emotional and personal level. He'd learn a lot here, getting a new perspective, responsibility. One of the younger children sitting on his lap yanked at his bangs a little too hard, and two others beside him started to bicker, which quickly escalated to screaming. And patience. So much patience. Come back any time, Toshinori. Miss Suzuki said as she walked with him to the door. Yes, of course. He smiled in return before turning to look back at the building. It's been years, but this place has always felt a little bit like home. And it was, for a short while. Miss Suzuki gave him a gentle smile. Is that why you decided to come back? A little bit. Toshinori chuckled. I wanted to return the kindness you and this place gave to me during a dark time in my life with the time I have left. The time you have left? You talk like an old man. If you take care of yourself, you have your whole life ahead of you. Toshinori forced himself not to grimace at her comment. Instead, Miss Suzuki laughed and shook her head. A part of me still sees you as the boy who came here all those years ago, doing everything he could to help others smile. I suppose some things never change. I suppose they don't, he breathed out a laugh. Have a good evening, Ms. Suzuki. Toshinori was exhausted by the time he finally got to his apartment. It wasn't fancy or anything. The only thing it had going for it was the view, and the ceiling was high enough to keep him from hitting his head on every door frame. Other than that, it was really just like any other apartment. Still, it's not like he had guests often, and he enjoyed being able to blend in. It gave him a much-needed break from all the hero stuff. Though, Toshinori was sure he was starting to concern his neighbors each time he came home in bandages. It's not like they suspected anything about his identity, at least not like Ms. Tsuyuki and Kyoko had. To his neighbors and the world, he was an unassuming, frail man. Toshinori fumbled for his keys to the door. He was grateful his home wasn't a long walk from UA. His only problem was that he kept stopping on his commute to help those in need. If he hadn't, then maybe things would have been resolved faster at the USJ. Everything was just a big mess now. He sighed softly and tried to open his door, wanting nothing more than to end the day. He groaned as he felt resistance from behind the door and forced it open. Speaking of messes, this place was modest, but it didn't mean it was clean. He shoved aside some boxes that had fallen in front of the door, and another sigh escaped him as he scanned the room. The room was filled with boxes of his things, along with merchandise and some gifts from over the years, most of which still needed unpacking. Toshinori rubbed the back of his head. He'd been here for nearly a year, and things looked almost the same as when he moved in. He tried to clean before, but the mess only seemed to grow even when he wasn't there. It was unsettling, like it had evolved and grown a mind of its own, and it was planning to take him out when his guard was down. A small shudder went down his spine as he spooked himself. Back when he first moved in, he remembered trying to clean on his days off. He had opened the balcony to try to air out the place, but while he worked, he heard a cry for help from down below. The next thing he knew, he had morphed into his hero form and jumped off the balcony. It was a little funny how shocked that villain was when All Might of all people had descended from the sky, yelling, "I am here." Crime rates had really dropped in his neighborhood since he moved in, but the mess remained. The only place he really managed to keep clean was a small shelf with a photo of his parents and another of Nana. "Hey Mom, Dad, Nana." Toshinori sighed heavily while he addressed the photos while he took off his shoes. He nodded at Nana's photo, before his attention lingered on the photo of his parents. "I'm home." It was an old family photo, taken when he was around 12 or so. His mother, Akemi, had a warm smile on her face as she stood behind him, her arms wrapped around him, while his father, Hikaru, stood beside them with an arm wrapped around her. A gentle smile spread across his face with a small scar peeking from the edge of his lip, and his eyes were almost hidden from the light reflecting off his glasses. Toshinori had always been told he'd gotten his smile from his mother, but that's where their physical similarities ended. She had long, curly green hair that reached below her shoulders. Most of his looks actually came from his father, from the blonde hair and blue eyes. If anything, his father's hairstyle wasn't too different from his All Might form, excluding the bunny ear bangs. Toshinori's hair only ever got close to being messy like his mother when he was young, but it somehow got neater with time. That is, until it decided to just turn into a bird's nest and Toshinori realized it was a losing battle to try to tame it. Still, he may not look very much like his mother, but they had very similar personalities. They were both cheerful, optimistic, kind and outgoing. In contrast, his father quiet, reserved at times and was much more mellow. When Toshinori thought about it, he felt he's adopted a bit of both their personalities these days. "It's been a day, but I made it back in one piece." Toshinori brushed some dust off the frame with his hand. I almost died today, but don't worry, I'm okay." He patted his side as if to assure them. Toshinori knew he was an adult now, but he doubted his parents' reactions to him getting hurt would have changed all that much. He could imagine his mom giving him a stern talk about being reckless again. It's what happened more or less when he was a kid and broke his leg after trying to fly by jumping off the roof. Back then, he had wanted more than anything to have a quirk, but he was a kid and not a lot was known about quirks quite yet. His mother would lecture him, and he and his father shared a look, knowing it was best to listen to what she had to say. It was unspoken, but Toshi knew his father was just as worried as his mother. Toshinori let the imaginary lecture play out in his mind. He knew that despite her stern words, his mother would end up hugging him and start to dote on him, glad he was okay. He really couldn't fly now, even with a quirk, but he could jump very high at least. "I guess I should plan to visit you guys soon. It's been a while, hasn't it?" Toshinori smiled weakly. "Things have been a bit too hectic for me to make the trip. There's no class tomorrow, so I can come visit then." It was better to go visit them in person to clean up their gravestones, and to let them know he's alright. Since he couldn't visit all the time, Toshinori had made a habit to always greet them when he got home. He usually found himself telling them about his day and found it therapeutic. It really helped him, especially after Nana died. "I made it another day, Nana." Toshinori smiled fondly at the photo of his grinning predecessor. He took a step forward and nearly tripped over a stray magazine on the floor. He flailed his arms to keep his balance and winced, glancing over at his mother, and knew she would not approve of the mess. She used to get on his case if there was even a single stray sock on the floor. Toshinori took another look around and groaned, his shoulders sagging. He really shouldn't try to clean up with his injuries. He only aggravated them more after he'd picked up the kids, something he really shouldn't have done, but now that the day was winding down he felt on edge. Quiet moments like this made him dwell on the what-ifs. What if he hadn't gotten to the USJ in time? What if something had happened to the students? What if Aizawa and 13 wouldn't be able to fully recover? What if Midoriya hadn't jumped to help him? He needed something to do to keep those thoughts from overwhelming him. Doing some light cleaning wouldn't do much harm, right? It's not like he was going to do anything crazy like pick up a couch. An old song found itself on his lips, and he hummed it lightly while he picked up a few things. He didn't remember many of the lyrics, but he vaguely remembered his father singing it to his mother while doing chores. A lot of his memories from that time felt distant, as if part of an old dream. It seemed like another life altogether, and so much has happened to Toshinori since then. It was a lot to process day in and day out, but he did what he could to keep moving forward. He knew he was having a very bad day if he chose not to talk to the photos at all. So, that made today a good day, right? Though, if he couldn't talk to his parents, he tried to at least talk to Nana. He owed her his life in so many ways, starting with the day they met. When he was 14, his entire hometown had been leveled in a villain attack. The day had started like any other. He said goodbye to his parents before heading to school. He never imagined that would be the last time he'd step outside of his childhood home. After that day, there was nothing left, and that part of his life was over, practically wiped from existence in an instant. He closed his eyes. The smell, smoke, and the heat of fire returned to him so easily. Toshi stumbled around, surrounded by demolished and burning buildings. There was a ringing in his ears, and his head felt like it was filled with fog. He barely even knew where he was or where he was going. Something just told him he had to keep moving, but it felt like he was walking through a nightmare. His foot snagged on a piece of debris, and he stumbled to the ground. He tried to get up again, but fell back and found himself staring at the sky as a mix of snow and soot fell onto his face. Wanting to rest, he closed his eyes when he heard someone call out to him. He didn't resist when they picked him up to check if he was okay. He opened his eyes slowly and thought he was looking at his mother. She was crying, but her voice didn't sound right. When his vision finally focused on her, he saw an injured woman he didn't recognize. She was covered in scrapes and cuts and looked to be some sort of hero. At least she had a cape. "I'm so glad you're okay." She tried to smile through tears, but something in her broke, and she lowered her head. The ringing in his ears got louder, and it was hard to hear what she was saying. Something about not being sure if she'd find anyone alive after all this. She kept apologizing, saying it was her fault that she couldn't stop it. Toshinori didn't know what to do or say, so he did the only thing he could think of and smiled, hoping it would make her feel better. "You're a strange kid smiling like that. I like your spirit." Her voice broke, but she smiled back and held him tighter. "What's your name?" "Toshi." It was all he could manage to say. "I'm Nana. It's nice to meet you, Toshi." She smiled through the tears and wrapped her cape around him like a blanket. "Let's get you somewhere safe." After that, he ended up in an orphanage with other displaced kids, waiting to hear any word of his parents. In the meantime, Toshi did what he could to help the rest of the kids. "You're always smiling whenever I come to see you, Toshinori." Nana ran her hand gently through his hair when she managed to come by to check in on him. "It's admirable, the way you try to help others cope after what's happened, but are you all right?" "Yeah, I'm okay." Toshi closed his eyes and offered her a sincere smile. "I think right now, most of us, especially the ones who have no idea what's going on or why this happened, need hope right now. That things are going to be okay again. You're definitely a strange kid, but I think that's what I like about you." Back when he'd been at the orphanage, Nana always found time to check up on him now and then. He'd been a complete wreck the day information had been released concerning who had died in the attack. By then, Toshinori had been smiling so long for others, to keep hope up, that he had felt himself break the moment he found out his parents were among the casualties. Deep down, he knew they were gone, but that didn't stop him from hoping until the very end. At least, meeting Nana gave him hope, a dream to become a hero who could save people with just a smile. He held on firmly to that dream, to make her proud and to be able to tell the world he was there. Even as he stood in front of Nana's grave, Torino, his adopted father, at his side, Toshinori smiled for her through the tears, determined to keep her legacy alive. As the years passed, he felt his resolve start to weaken, and the smile felt more and more like a mask. He felt alone, but had to keep enduring for the sake of the world. It became difficult for him to talk to his parents, Nana. Even Torino tried to call and send letters, but Toshinori let them pile up, unsure of what he could possibly say. He felt at a loss, and it was eating up at him, until Midoriya came into his life. During those long months of training, he found himself talking to the photos about Midoriya for hours. He talked to his parents about how much they'd like the boy and would have loved to meet him, and he would tell Nana every day how much Midoriya was improving. The day Toshinori found out Midoriya had passed the practical exam, he barged into the house and screamed, "He passed!" He was sure the neighbors could hear him, but it didn't matter. He even got a bit choked up and raised a glass for the occasion. Despite everything that happened, he felt at peace, something he hadn't felt for a long time. Everything was starting to feel okay. It was like he could breathe easier now. He didn't think that would be possible after losing a lung, but he wasn't complaining. Toshinori busied himself with his task again, noting he was making some progress. He could see the top of the table now. He looked around for anything else he could do before he turned in for the night. He tried to gauge the size and weight of a stack of boxes that he swears warped its way to the door to his room. Or were they always there, and he just sort of shoved past them every morning? He sighed, not willing to admit how much of a mess he was in his personal life. Even on his days off, he never really had a moment to himself, given he usually spent it out of the house. He liked to use his time to volunteer at the orphanage and occasionally at hospitals to make all-night appearances when he could. Most of what he did at home was sleep and eat, which he supposed was why he could never keep the place organized. Shaking his head, he picked up the first box. He winced, realizing it was heavier than he'd expected. He was just about to set it back down again when the bottom of the box ripped open and a bunch of All Might merchandise tumbled out and hit his foot. Toshinori groaned loudly. Whenever he tried to clean, the mess just kept growing. He bent down to pick up a few things, but the motion suddenly shot pain through his injury, sending him to the ground with a thud. He writhed and waited for the pain to subside. He wasn't sure how long he waited, staring at the ceiling. He found one of the bobbleheads by his hand and picked it up, displeased. He was met with his painted face on the toy and a beaming smile. It was mocking him. "You've got no one to blame but yourself for this one, Toshinori." He muttered, tapping the bobblehead's face, and it nodded in agreement. "Literally." He sighed and absently rubbed his side in an attempt to soothe the pain. It still stung from when Nomu had grabbed him. He wondered if it had been a coincidence or not that villains were somehow always drawn to this spot, even when his Soulmark wasn't even there anymore. Toshinori would never forget the hourglass with sand the color of a red and blue nebula. The hourglass was sophisticated, yet the edges of it were jagged with wisps of smoke coming off it. Most of the smoke came from the top and base of the hourglass. Before, he had figured it was supposed to symbolize Mirai's ability to view the future and their time together. Sometimes these marks were more metaphorical than anything. Neither of them noticed when the hourglass had begun losing its grains of sand over the years. It was as if it was counting down to Mirai's premonition, long before either of them even knew what it was. "If you go on like this, you'll fight a villain and meet a death too gruesome to describe." Toshinori grimaced as Mirai's words echoed in his mind. Now that the hourglass was gone, he had no sure way of telling how much time he had left, but Mirai had put it 6 or 7 years from that day in the hospital. At first, he wasn't very afraid. He knew his death was from existence in an instant. He closed his eyes, the smell, smoke and the heat of fire returned to him so easily. Toshi stumbled around, surrounded by demolished and burning buildings. There was a ringing in his ears and his head felt like it was filled with fog. He barely even knew where he was or where he was going. Something just told him he had to keep moving, but it felt like he was walking through a nightmare. His foot snagged on a piece of debris, and he stumbled to the ground. He tried to get up again, but fell back and found himself staring at the sky as a mix of snow and soot fell onto his face. Wanting to rest, he closed his eyes when he heard someone call out to him. He didn't resist when they picked him up to check if he was okay. He opened his eyes slowly and thought he was looking at his mother. She was crying, but her voice didn't sound right. When his vision finally focused on her, he saw an injured woman he didn't recognize. She was covered in scrapes and cuts and looked to be some sort of hero. At least she had a cape. "I'm so glad you're okay." She tried to smile through tears, but something in her broke, and she lowered her head. The ringing in his ears got louder, and it was hard to hear what she was saying. Something about not being sure if she'd find anyone alive after all this. She kept apologizing, saying it was her fault that she couldn't stop it. Toshinori didn't know what to do or say, so he did the only thing he could think of and smiled, hoping it would make her feel better. "You're a strange kid smiling like that. I like your spirit." Her voice broke, but she smiled back and held him tighter. "What's your name?" "Toshi." It was all he could manage to say. "I'm Nana. It's nice to meet you, Toshi." She smiled through the tears and wrapped her cape around him like a blanket. "Let's get you somewhere safe." After that, he ended up in an orphanage with other displaced kids, waiting to hear any word of his parents. In the meantime, Toshi did what he could to help the rest of the kids. "You're always smiling whenever I come to see you, Toshinori." Nana ran her hand gently through his hair when she managed to come by to check in on him. "It's admirable, the way you try to help others cope after what's happened, but are you all right?" "Yeah, I'm okay." Toshi closed his eyes and offered her a sincere smile. "I think right now, most of us, especially the ones who have no idea what's going on or why this happened, need hope right now. That things are going to be okay again. You're definitely a strange kid, but I think that's what I like about you." Back when he'd been at the orphanage, Nana always found time to check up on him now and then. He'd been a complete wreck the day information had been released concerning who had died in the attack. By then, Toshinori had been smiling so long for others, to keep hope up, that he had felt himself break the moment he found out his parents were among the casualties. Deep down, he knew they were gone, but that didn't stop him from hoping until the very end. At least, meeting Nana gave him hope, a dream to become a hero who could save people with just a smile. He held on firmly to that dream, to make her proud and to be able to tell the world he was there. Even as he stood in front of Nana's grave, Torino, his adopted father, at his side, Toshinori smiled for her through the tears, determined to keep her legacy alive. As the years passed, he felt his resolve start to weaken, and the smile felt more and more like a mask. He felt alone, but had to keep enduring for the sake of the world. It became difficult for him to talk to his parents, Nana. Even Torino tried to call and send letters, but Toshinori let them pile up, unsure of what he could possibly say. He felt at a loss, and it was eating up at him, until Midoriya came into his life. During those long months of training, he found himself talking to the photos about Midoriya for hours. He talked to his parents about how much they'd like the boy and would have loved to meet him, and he would tell Nana every day how much Midoriya was improving. The day Toshinori found out Midoriya had passed the practical exam, he barged into the house and screamed, "He passed!" He was sure the neighbors could hear him, but it didn't matter. He even got a bit choked up and raised a glass for the occasion. Despite everything that happened, he felt at peace, something he hadn't felt for a long time. Everything was starting to feel okay. It was like he could breathe easier now. He didn't think that would be possible after losing a lung, but he wasn't complaining. Toshinori busied himself with his task again, noting he was making some progress. He could see the top of the table now. He looked around for anything else he could do before he turned in for the night. He tried to gauge the size and weight of a stack of boxes that he swears warped its way to the door to his room. Or were they always there, and he just sort of shoved past them every morning? He sighed, not willing to admit how much of a mess he was in his personal life. Even on his days off, he never really had a moment to himself, given he usually spent it out of the house. He liked to use his time to volunteer at the orphanage and occasionally at hospitals to make all-night appearances when he could. Most of what he did at home was sleep and eat, which he supposed was why he could never keep the place organized. Shaking his head, he picked up the first box. He winced, realizing it was heavier than he'd expected. He was just about to set it back down again when the bottom of the box ripped open and a bunch of All Might merchandise tumbled out and hit his foot. Toshinori groaned loudly. Whenever he tried to clean, the mess just kept growing. He bent down to pick up a few things, but the motion suddenly shot pain through his injury, sending him to the ground with a thud. He writhed and waited for the pain to subside. He wasn't sure how long he waited, staring at the ceiling. He found one of the bobbleheads by his hand and picked it up, displeased. He was met with his painted face on the toy and a beaming smile. It was mocking him. "You've got no one to blame but yourself for this one, Toshinori." He muttered, tapping the bobblehead's face, and it nodded in agreement. "Literally." He sighed and absently rubbed his side in an attempt to soothe the pain. It still stung from when Nomu had grabbed him. He wondered if it had been a coincidence or not that villains were somehow always drawn to this spot, even when his soul mark wasn't even there anymore. Tashinori would never forget the hourglass with sand the color of a red and blue nebula. The hourglass was sophisticated, yet the edges of it were jagged with wisps of smoke coming off it. Most of the smoke came from the top and base of the hourglass. Before, he had figured it was supposed to symbolize Mirai's ability to view the future and their time together. Sometimes these marks were more metaphorical than anything. Neither of them noticed when the hourglass had begun losing its grains of sand over the years. It was as if it was counting down to Mirai's premonition, long before either of them even knew what it was. If you go on like this, you'll fight a villain and meet a death too gruesome to describe. Tashinori grimaced as Mirai's words echoed in his mind. Now that the hourglass was gone, he had no sure way of telling how much time he had left, but Mirai had put it 6 or 7 years from that day in the hospital. At first, he wasn't very afraid. He knew his death was coming. Now, he couldn't stop thinking of everyone he'd leave behind. Tashinori had known long before coming to this city that he'd have to find a successor, but he hadn't given much thought to how attached he'd become. Midoriya he was in his life now. The thought of his mortality and his time slipping away with each minute made it so hard for him to let go of that hug. He was scared Midoriya would live a life without him, just as he had to when Nana died. He missed her every day and never wanted Midoriya to experience that loss. It wasn't fair. When they hugged, Midoriya had told him he wanted to be there for him, just like he has for him. In that moment, it hit Tashinori how close they'd come to losing each other. It wasn't only that he'd nearly been killed, it was his declining health and that DMN premonition. No matter how he looked at it, his time was limited. He closed his eyes, no longer able to hold the doubts and fear at bay. He took a deep breath and pulled out his phone from his pocket. Shaky hands fumbled and brought up an image of a boy with messy hair crying at the beach. Tashinori let a small smile form on his lips. He found himself looking at this image often to encourage himself and to see how much Midoriya had grown. He'll be fine, Tashinori said to himself quietly, desperately wanting to believe his own words. Pain jabbed into his side, and he groaned again. He was too exhausted to even move an inch. This was pathetic. He was literally just outside of his room, but it might as well have been a mile to his bed. Tashinori huffed softly, slowly accepting the floor as his new bed. At least Midoriya would definitely turn out much better than himself. At least he hoped. Tashinori stared at his phone and began to scroll through his photos absently. He didn't have very many, mostly for safety in case he ever lost it in public. He felt a tug on his heart and realized he was looking for something he knew he should have deleted a long time ago. It was stupid, but that didn't stop him from going to his list of contacts just to make sure if it was still there. His eyes widened when he saw Mirai's profile was still there. Had he really forgotten to delete it, or? Of course he does this when he's too tired to stop himself. Yes, it's not weird, looking for a photo of the man fate bound to you, only to cut him from your life. Tashinori couldn't shake the feeling anymore. He had to see him, even if it was like this. Without giving it a second thought, he clicked Mirai's name to expand the image. His breath caught in his throat when he saw him and realized that in a way, Mirai was staring back at him for the first time in years. Though, smiling was a more accurate word, and seeing it again made his heart ache. Most people didn't think Sir Night Eye was one to smile, but Tashinori knew different. Tashinori absently ran his finger along the image. It used to be so easy for him get Mirai to make that dumb smile just by smiling back. He could still remember the exact moment he took this photo. Have you seen my glasses? Mirai looked up, surprised to see Tashinori lounging on their bed and wearing his glasses with a playful grin on his face. Tashinori took the photo the moment Mirai started to laugh. His expression softened. Night Eye's laugh felt like music to his ears. He'd taken several photos, determined to capture this moment no matter how many photos it took. A blush formed on Mirai's face, and he started to look rather flustered. Give them back, he asked curtly, hand open towards him. Kiss first. Tashinori tilted his head and puckered his lips. Mirai sighed and pretended to be annoyed as he sat on the bed beside him. He rested a thumb on his, parting his lips as he leaned forward. Toshinori jumped back when he suddenly felt a cool spray of mint hit his mouth rather than the warmth of Mirai's lips. "You haven't brushed your teeth yet, heathen?" Mirai stared at him with a blank expression, holding a mouth spray in one hand, while taking his glasses back on with the other. Toshinori could only stare at him, baffled, before he burst out laughing. "Well, since you helped me freshen up," mischief shined in his eyes. Mirai's eyes widened and he had no time to defend himself as he was tackled onto the bed. He turned his head quickly, making Toshinori miss his mark as he planted a kiss on his cheek. That didn't deter Toshinori as he pecked several kisses across along Mirai's cheek, jaw and nose, anywhere he could reach while his beloved squirmed beneath him. "Brush your teeth," Mirai yelled, curling his fingers around his, but was now trying and failing to stop himself from laughing. Toshinori rested his head against his and laughed heartedly. Mirai leaned up to finally kiss him, but failed as they came to realize it was almost impossible to kiss while laughing. The realization only caused them to laugh even more. Toshinori gave up and buried his face in Mirai's neck and waited to calm down. "I can't believe I fall for your charm every time," Mirai finally breathed, his laughter subsiding, running his fingers through his golden locks. Toshinori turned to look up at him with a grin. Toshinori rolled back onto the bed, pulling Mirai over him. "You know you love it." Unfortunately, Mirai settled against him, tracing a knuckle against his cheek. His expression held no amusement. Toshinori's grin only grew and Mirai cracked, returning the fond look as he leaned down to place a proper kiss on his lips. Toshinori blushed, surprised by how much something so curt felt like an "I love you," and accepted the kiss eagerly. He slipped a hand beneath Mirai's shirt along his back until he found what he'd been searching for. He traced his fingers along his Soulmark, earning a soft sigh from Mirai. "We're going to be late for work, Toshinori." Mirai hummed, though his eyes remained closed. 10 more minutes. 5. As far as Toshinori remembered, it had been much longer than 5 minutes. Toshinori just stared at the photo, willing the memory away, and he closed his eyes. What happened between them was a lifetime ago. It didn't matter though. After difficult days like this, he always found himself missing those moments. He'd felt alone and there was nothing he could really do now to rid himself of this feeling. He missed having someone by his side, to hold, to tease, to love and to be loved in return. There really wasn't anyone else he held as close to his heart as Mirai. That part of his life was over now. What could he do with the little time he had left? "What the hell am I doing?" Toshinori groaned softly. "Stop being so sentimental." He clicked out of the screen, but to his horror, it lit up and the phone began to ring. Sheet. He quickly fumbled to end the call before it was too late. Curse his square thumbs. "Sir Night Eye speaking." Toshinori froze the moment he heard Mirai's voice. He covered his mouth to keep himself from spitting up any blood, and his mind went completely blank. He wasn't sure what to do. What could he even say? Do something. "Hello? Is anyone there? Are you alright?" Toshinori let out an undignified squawk and hurled the phone across the room. His mind was racing too fast to think straight. Did he even hang up? What if he could still hear him? Toshinori was too scared to even move and laid there completely still, not daring to move. This was not one of his proudest moments, he had to admit. He curled up tightly on the floor hoping if he ignored it, none of this had happened. Why did he have to be so weak and make a stupid mistake like that? In the end, this was just about all his heart and sleep-deprived body could take for a night. He felt himself lose consciousness, and for once he welcomed it. Though, just before he passed out, he thought he heard his ringtone screaming from across the room. "For a phone call.is here." As the days began to pass by at the orphanage, Toshi would see other kids come and go. Despite the destruction and chaos, they'd been reunited with family again and he kept waiting for his turn. At the very least, he wanted to hear something, anything to calm the doubt that sunk in his stomach. He just wanted this nightmare to be over, so they could go home, wherever that would be now. It would be over soon. It had to be. "Quit spacing out, Toshi." One of the other kids brushed past him, carrying juice boxes to set out for lunch. "Sorry." He grimaced, stepping out of the way and of course straight into Ms. Suzuki. "Are you okay, my dear?" She skillfully balanced the plates in her hands while steadying him on his feet. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Toshi smiled sheepishly. It's all right, how about you help me set these out? She asked, offering him a few plates. Toshi nodded and got to work, finding himself humming a song while he set everything out. When he set down the last plate, he noticed one of the caretakers walk in with a boy he hadn't seen before. The boy was small, he couldn't have been older than 7, or he had short, messy green hair and glasses that looked a little too big for his face. Though, the thing that stood out the most to Tashinori was how empty the boy looked. It was as if there was no emotion on his face. The sight tugged at something in his heart. Tashinori, do you think you could speak to our new arrival? Ms. Suzuki rested a hand on his shoulder. Oh, sure. What's his name? He asked, not taking his eyes off the boy. That's the thing. We haven't been able to figure that out. She sighed, setting down and arranging the plates on the table. He hasn't said a word since the attack. You've gotten some of the other kids to open up. Do you think you could give it a try? I'll do my best, he offered her a smile. Leave it to me. Toshi approached the boy, determined to help however he could. He was already seated at the end of the table by himself. That wouldn't do. He opened his mouth to speak and gently rested a hand on the boy's back to get his attention. Whatever words he was about to say left him the moment he felt a jolt and the boy looked up, just as surprised. Toshi gasped when he saw his eyes. They were completely black and his irises were bright purple. He stood there, mouth hanging open in awe, until he noticed the fear in the boy's eyes. Hey, are you okay? Get away from me. The boy screamed and Toshi was sent tumbling back as he was pushed out of the way. He managed to catch himself on the table and watched the kid leave shocked. The kid who wouldn't say a word to anyone finally spoke, and it was that ouch. It was better than nothing? Toshi found himself moving his food on his plate absently during the rest of lunch. The caretakers managed to find the boy hiding under his bed, but no one could get him to come out. Each attempt was met with more screaming to get away and to be left alone. When lunchtime finally ended, Toshi stood, knowing what he had to do. He couldn't just give up now. He grabbed a plate of food and a juice box. Ms. Suzuki gave him a sympathetic look from across the room as he headed out of the lunch hall and to the bedrooms. Once he was there, he scanned the room and noticed a blanket was pulled over the edge of one of the beds. He took a deep breath and walked over. Toshi had been thinking over and over what he could have done wrong to spook the poor kid. Whatever it was, he had to be patient with this one. Time to start with a peace offering. Hey, so I'm sorry about earlier. Toshi sat down beside the bed and set the plate and juice down. I brought you some food. To his surprise, the blanket curtain moved a bit and a small hand reached out to pick up the juice box, only to disappear back under the bed. Toshi grinned and laid down beside the bed. Okay, small progress. He could work with that. At least he wasn't being yelled at to leave this time. Thank you. A small voice spoke up. Tashinori, he propped his hand on his chin. What's your name, Night Eye? What did you just call me? The curtain opened again and Toshi was surprised to see a pair of golden eyes instead of the dark ones he'd seen before. Night Eye. Toshi hummed, your eyes when they changed before. They're really pretty. I like your eyes now too. They're really bright, like the sun. It's like you have day and night eyes. That's pretty cool. The boy stared at him surprised and turned bright red and he quickly hid his face behind his hands. You look more like the sun, he muttered, peeking through his fingers to look at Toshi as if it was hard to look at him directly. I'll take that as a compliment. Toshi laughed and the boy seemed to relax a little. Is it all right if I call you Night Eye? Wait, is just Night Eye too rude? Should it be something fancier? Sir Night Eye. How's that? The boy looked at him bewildered and for a moment Toshi thought he said something wrong again. His expression was unreadable until a smile spread across his face and he started to laugh. Toshi's heart leaped at the sound. I like that name. Night Eye looked at him fondly. It'd make a great hero name. Hero name? Yeah. I'd love to have a cool hero name like that, to be honest. Night Eye snorted, his smile growing. I'd never thought about being a hero. At least, not with a quirk like mine. Oh, what's your quirk? Toshi tilted his head. Night Eye tensed and looked away. My mom thinks I can see people's future, kind of like her, but it's different. I can see more than her, but none of it makes any sense, he said, rubbing his eyes. It's like I'm watching a bad dream and it's hard for me to remember once it stops. Whoa, really? Toshi stared at him in awe before he noticed tears prick at the edges of the boy's eyes. Hey, what's wrong? For a while, when I saw people's future, I kept seeing fire and smoke. Night Eye's breath hitched, unable to meet Toshi's gaze as tears began to fall. I could see the attack was coming, but I didn't know when or what to do to stop it. If I knew how to use it, I could have helped, then maybe none of this would have happened. Hey, that doesn't matter. What happened wasn't your fault. Toshi reached out instinctively to rest a hand on his cheek. It was a villain, someone who wanted to hurt people. I think it makes you a good person that you want to use your quirk to help people. Night Eye looked at him surprised and found himself staring at the ground. I want to stop bad things from happening before they happen. Train to use your quirk. Toshi smiled brightly. You could go to a hero school and then become a hero. Night Eye looked back up at Toshi as if trying to search for something. Toshi watched him, puzzled, but he waited for him. I think that we're going to become really strong heroes together. What? Really? Wait, did you see our future? Before he could ask anything else, Night Eye reached over to grab his bangs and held them up above his face to stick them out like rabbit ears. Toshi looked up at his bangs surprised before returning his attention to Night Eye. You know, you're a strange kid. You were always smiling, Night Eye laughed, and your hair was up like this. Don't tell me anything. I'll find out. Toshi covered his ears. Wait, no, just one more thing. What's my hero name? I don't know. He shrugged helplessly. I didn't hear it. Sorry. Come on, don't leave me hanging. What do you think it would be then, partner? Toshi laughed and Night Eye stared at him for a few moments while he looked him over. Sunflower hair. What? That doesn't sound cool at all. Toshi whined, grabbing Night Eye's wrists gently, which made him let go of his bangs. Sir Sunflower Hair. Night Eye said without missing a beat. Toshi stared at him, pretending to be offended while Night Eye stared right back. It was obvious he was holding back the urge to laugh. In the end, they both caved and burst out laughing. Mirai, Night Eye finally said between laughs, my name is Mirai Sasaki. It wasn't long after that Mirai was able to be reunited with his family. His mother had come the moment she found out where he was. For a brief moment when Toshi saw her green hair, he thought it was his own mother. That is, until Mirai left his side, calling out for his mother, and the two embraced tightly. Toshi stood there and smiled despite the ache in his heart. He should be happy for his friend. What else would he feel? He thought as his vision began to blur. He quickly wiped his eyes and smiled when Mirai turned back to look at him. He was happy. Present. Toshinori woke up with one of the bobbleheads sticking into his side. He let out a soft groan as he sat up and tried to work the Keinkes out of his back and neck. He was vaguely aware that his morning alarm was screaming somewhere. He was too tired to make out any of the words and slowly got up to search for his phone. It was too early to deal with this right now. He just wanted to get some proper sleep, but he also knew the DMN thing wouldn't turn off until he put it on snooze. Why did I think recording my voice screaming would be a good alarm? Toshinori muttered, rubbing his eye as he picked up his phone near the far wall. He grimaced when he noticed a large crack on the screen. He remembered throwing it for some reason, but his head was too groggy to remember clearly. You're going to be late for class. The alarm went off again, each word suddenly becoming crystal clear. I don't go to school anymore. Toshinori glared at the phone and shut off the alarm before he noticed the time. I'm the teacher. It didn't hit Toshinori until he was in the middle of a quick shower that school was closed for the day because of the attack. He wasn't sure whether he should feel relieved or annoyed. Maybe both. Regardless, he made a note to himself to change his DMN alarm to something that won't give him a heart attack. While he was getting dressed, Toshinori noticed his phone was nearly dead and plugged it into charge. Just as he was about to set it down, he noticed some notifications. One missed call, Sir Knight. One new voicemail, Sir Knight. Toshinori froze as it all came rushing back to him. Last night was real. He actually did that and Mirai called him back. His heart began to pound as he felt a knot form in his throat. He started to mutter, trying to reason why Mirai would call him back. Anything he thought of made him feel too hopeful, so he shoved those feelings aside. Should he listen to it? What would it matter if he did? The voicemail was only about a minute long. What could he say in a minute? He should just delete it. Before he knew it, he'd press it and the message began play. Toshinori. There was a beat of silence and he wasn't sure if Mirai would say anything else. I assume by your panicked squawk that this call was a mistake. The night before. Mirai's eyes lingered over the reports scattered across his desk of each individual involved in the attack on UA. The news report of the event played again on the background. He'd already studied it over and over, but there was little more information he could pull from it. Despite the massive attack, there was only one student who'd been badly injured, but expected to make a full recovery. I suppose that was you, troublemaker? Mirai glanced at the TV for a moment before his gaze dropped to a photo of Izuku Midoriya that sat on his desk. 2 teachers were hospitalized, having taken the brunt of the attack. We've been informed they are in recovery. The news reporter continued. We were unable to get a word with All Might, but his people assure us he is recovering well. Reckless. Both of you. Mirai sighed, shutting off the TV and removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose to relieve the tension. Being on this side of the camera these past years made difficult to see just how much was kept from the spotlight in order to keep the public at ease. He needed to thank Nedzu the next time he spoke to him that he called to tell him anything at all. Toshinori certainly wouldn't do it himself. He set back Midoriya's photo back with his file and closed his eyes. He let the noise from the TV become background noise when his phone began to ring. Despite the odd hour, he decided to answer it. Sir Night Eye speaking. He hoped his voice didn't sound as drained as he felt. He hadn't even bothered to look who'd been calling. He gave whoever it was on the other end of the line a moment to answer before he realized no one was responding. Hello? Is anyone there? Are you all right? Mirai was surprised when he heard a panicked cry, followed by a loud thud before the call seemingly cut off. Perhaps it was because he was on edge and exhausted that he tried to call back. When he got no answer, he decided to just let it go, but just as he was about to hang up, the voicemail message began to play. You've reached Toshinori Yagi. Sorry I missed your call blah blah blah. Please leave your message after the beep. Beep. Mirai tensed and nearly dropped the phone when he heard his voice. Under different circumstances, he would have laughed at Toshinori's voicemail message. One of the reasons he had enjoyed being around him was his sense of humor. Toshinori had gotten him to smile since the day they met. Even seeing him joke on interviews these past few years still managed to get a chuckle out of him despite everything. Mirai took a deep breath and realized the voicemail was still recording. Given how they left things off when they'd last spoken, he didn't expect Toshinori to call again. Toshinori. Mirai spoke barely above a whisper. Perhaps the reason Toshinori called was that something happened? Could it be urgent? He paused and considered what he knew, then he let out a deep sigh. No, I assume by your panicked squawk that this call was a mistake. He should just hang up. It was obviously a mistake. What else could he do? They made their decision a long time ago. There wasn't anything they could do to change it. Still, Mirai closed his eyes and let himself believe Toshinori was listening on the other end of the line. It's been over 6 years, and you still haven't changed your voicemail message. He couldn't stop a small smile from forming on his lips as he ran his fingers through his hair, mindful of the gold streaks. Toshinori certainly hadn't changed a bit. He wondered if he could say the same for himself. Hanging up would be easier than whatever this was. You made it another day. Tell him you're glad he's okay. Good night, Toshi. Mirai set the phone down, deciding he'd had enough of a headache for one night and tried to get some rest. Much to his dismay, he found it difficult to sleep that night, because of a certain messy-haired man who had broken his heart. You've moved past this, Mirai. He said to himself, even while he found himself standing in front of a mirror, already removing his shirt. So, remind yourself, why are you doing this? Mirai considered it a small blessing that his Soulmark was somewhere he couldn't see it easily. It's kept it out of sight and out of mind for the most part these past years. Still, there were times when he felt weak and needed to see it for himself. He took a deep breath and paused. He couldn't even remember the last time he looked at it. Finally, he glanced back behind him and his breath hitched. He reached back as far as he could to brush his fingers along the delicate golden petals and green curving stems resting along his left shoulder blade. Mirai would never forget the jolt he felt when his mark had formed at Toshi's touch. He'd been so surprised that precisely at that moment, his quirk had activated when he looked into those big blue eyes. There was very little he could remember from the vision he saw that day. Only that he'd seen two heroes standing side by side. It was like a dream. He could not make out their faces, but something in him told him it was them. "Toshi!" Mirai yelled, running back to the entrance of the orphanage. He couldn't leave, not yet. "We'll meet again, in the future as heroes. I look forward to it, partner." Toshi raised his arm up to him with a grin on his face. Mirai looks at him surprised for a moment, but raised his arm to his and returned the smile. They parted ways that day without realizing their soul marks had formed. Mirai's mark had been nothing more than a flower bud. For years it remained like that and he hadn't been entirely sure what he'd been looking at. Not until it started to bloom, when fate finally decided to have their paths cross again years later. "You're him. The boy with night eyes." Before Mirai knew it, Toshinori had picked him up and twirled him around in a hug, laughing in pure delight. "Wait, no, sunflower hair? That's Sir Sunflower Hair to you." All those years ago, two lost souls had found each other in the darkness, giving each other hope and a reason to smile. Then to reunite once more and their connection to deepen and grow into something more. For a long time, Mirai thought they'd be inseparable, remaining by each other's side despite the obstacles or hardships. He grimaced, remembering that fateful day in the hospital. Tubes and machinery all hooked up to that gaping hole in Toshinori's stomach. Fear overwhelmed Mirai that the man he loved wouldn't make it. He reached out to him, needing to see it for himself. He shouldn't have. It was a mistake. If he hadn't seen it, would things have gone differently then in that hallway? "I understand your theory on the symbol. But, look, you can't smile at all, can you?" Mirai gripped his sleeve tightly, afraid if he let go Toshinori would collapse then and there. It pained Mirai to see Toshinori's lip tremble. He couldn't even force himself to smile. Why was he doing this to himself? Why won't he listen to reason? "If you continue like this, I will not support you." "I can't. I don't want to." Mirai's grip loosened as Toshinori stepped out of his grasp. He was going where he couldn't follow and Mirai couldn't keep watching him destroy himself. "Did you see it?" Black, accusing eyes stared back at him. "Didn't I tell you that you didn't have to use your foresight on me? Even if you retire, the next number one will appear." Mirai wanted to look away ashamed, but he couldn't, not after what he knew now. There was no going back now after what he saw, but there must be something they could still do. Things might get rough for a while, but we might be able to avoid that. "Please. Anything. In that short time. How many people will have to be afraid?" Toshinori shot back and it was his turn to look away. "Besides, your foresight has never been wrong, has it? There has just been no precedent. It was just a theory, based on what Mirai knew of his quirk. He couldn't just accept it as fact that there was absolutely nothing he could do. "I will change the future." But Toshinori kept moving forward. "At this rate, it'll all go according to my foresight. That can't happen." Another step further. "I'm here because I want to help you." Why was it so hard for Toshinori to see that? For the sake of the world. "I shouldn't be here, Mirai," was all he could say in return. "Toshinori!" "Stop. Please stop." Mirai clenched his fist, shaking. "If you go on like this you'll fight a villain and meet a death too gruesome to describe." The thought of seeing Toshinori dead on the ground, in a pool of his own blood scared Mirai. However, seeing Toshinori continue to push and destroy himself, even with the knowledge of his fate, absolutely terrified him. It was as if Toshinori had no longing to fight for himself, but Mirai did. And so, with each hurtful word, each time he was pushed away, and every step Toshinori took pulled a petal off Mirai's Soulmark. Mirai couldn't bear to lose him, even if it meant he had to walk out of his life. As long as Toshinori lived it didn't matter. While the mark remained, pieces of him were being taken from him, damaged, irreparable. The petals on his back scattered to match that, all along his back as if being blown by the wind. Even now, all these years later, it hurt Mirai to think about how much he still missed Toshinori, but their final words cut through him like a knife in his back. And if he took out that blade, he felt he'd bleed out. Mirai closed his eyes, unable to bear looking at the mark a moment longer. After what Toshinori had said to him, it should have faded and YET was damaged, but it was still here. The only logical conclusion he could come to only made his heart ache more. A hopeful part of him wondered after everything, had Toshinori's mark not been destroyed, would it have faded? Present. Good night, Toshi. Toshinori was motionless, curled around himself as the voicemail ended. He clutched his phone, while he gripped his scar tightly. His heart was beating like it was going to explode. He felt numb, but at the same time everything ached. You're really going to be late now if you don't hurry. Hurry! Hurry! Another alarm he forgot to turn off echoed in the room. He turned it off without a word and waited for the whirlwind of emotions to pass, but felt overwhelmed it was sending everything crashing back. He found his thoughts returning to that fateful day 6 years ago. Anger and hatred consumed Toshinori's mind as those around prepared for the raid. Anyone he would walk past would quickly jump out of the way, as if afraid to be trampled on, but Toshinori kept moving forward. This was finally it. He'd finally tracked down the man that had taken his MSTR, his family and his life from him. He was finally going to pay for what he'd done. To his surprise, a hand suddenly grabbed his wrist and he was dragged down another hall before he could even think to protest. Mirai made no attempt to explain himself until they were finally alone. Come back alive, he whispered, cupping his face between his hands. Toshinori felt his anger drain out of him for the moment and his expression softened. He rested his hands over Mirai's and leaned his head against his. He would allow himself this quiet moment before the storm, if anything, for Mirai's sake. They'd been through so much, hours of research, investigating, everything leading to this moment, together. I will return to your side, right where I belong. The worry didn't leave Mirai's eyes, but for now, his words seemed to be enough. Without warning, Mirai grabbed Toshinori's collar and pulled him down to his level, filling the space between them. Toshinori's arms hung out at his sides, unsure what to do as Mirai captured his mouth with his and wrapped his arms around his neck. Toshinori watched him for a moment, taken aback that Mirai was shaking and the worried look on his face remained. No, that wouldn't do. A small yelp escaped Mirai as Toshinori picked him off his feet, resting a hand on his back and another at his hip, and he parted his lips to deepen their kiss. Neither of them knew what the outcome of this battle would be, and Toshinori wasn't about to let Mirai carry that burden if he were to look and see something they were unable to prevent. But right now wasn't the time to think about that. Right now, in this moment, as far as they were concerned, there was no one else in the world but them. They were breathless when they finally pulled away and rested their heads against the other. Toshinori breathed heavily and nuzzles his nose against Mirai's, and the gesture was returned wordlessly. In their silence, he focused on the taste of mint that still lingered in his mouth from Mirai. He couldn't help but cracked a small smile. Mirai would always lecture how important it was to have fresh breath. They needed to be professional after all, especially how they were always held at a high standard. As a result, their kisses would always have a coolness to it with a hint of mint. It was all Toshinori could think of to keep himself sane the moment pain exploded through his side and the taste of bitter iron overwhelmed him as his mouth filled with his own blood. Breathing felt like 1,000 knives stabbing into his chest, and he nearly blacked out from the pain. It was like nothing he'd ever experienced. Was he dying? His vision clouded, but he forced himself to stay conscious as he looked up to meet AFO's eyes. The man watched him as a predator would look upon their prey they'd been toying with, but had finally gotten bored with. AFO dug his clawed hands deeper into Toshinori's side and he screamed, only to choke on his own blood. What happened next, Toshinori couldn't explain. All he could remember were fragments, but even then he couldn't truly understand what had led to him kneeling on the ground in front of something that hardly looked human and more like a pile of raw meat. There was so much blood, it pooled around them. His blood, their blood. Mirai was at his side in an instant, slipping in his haste, but seemed unfazed as he got back up and cupped his face in his hands. shaking, terrified but alive. Mirai was trying to tell him something, but Toshinori could no longer hear him. He couldn't hear anything, he couldn't move, he couldn't feel anything as everything slipped away into nothingness. His first memory after he awoke in the hospital feeling of someone's hand around his own. He couldn't open his eyes at first, but his first instinct was to tighten his grip. It took a few tries, but when he finally got his hand to move, Toshinori, Mirai breathed out as if he'd been holding his breath until this very moment. He pressed his hand to his lips as quiet sobs filled the room. Toshinori let out a pained breath, wanting nothing more than to be able to comfort his beloved, but all he could do was squeeze his hand. As the days passed and the medication wore off, Toshinori felt like death. He was in and out of it for the beginning of it. Every time he awoke, there were fewer cables connected to his stomach. When his memory began to clear, he noticed there was something off about Mirai. At first, he wasn't sure what it was. It was as if it had become difficult to read him. There were so many times Toshinori wanted to ask what was wrong, but couldn't find the right words. Though one day, Mirai seemed to understand Toshinori's frustrations before he could voice them, but ended the discussion by saying he was fine. Toshinori didn't believe him. During one of his visits, Mirai had stepped out for a moment to speak with Recovery Girl. Through his own boredom, Toshinori made a mistake of turning on the news. What he saw were reports after reports of unrest, attacks, and so many asking where was the symbol of peace. Where was he? I understand the importance of the symbol, but look at yourself. You can't even smile. Mirai grimaced as he kept Toshinori on his feet after finding him in the middle of the hall trying to leave. If you continue like this, I will not support you. I can't. I don't want to. Toshinori gritted his teeth at the ache he felt in his heart at his words. Can't? Don't want to? What was scaring him this badly? Did you see it? Toshinori gasped. The realization sat heavily in what remained of his stomach. It all clicked together now. Why Mirai had become so distant, so quiet. What else could it have been? Mirai didn't even need to say it and instead chose to insist he should retire, as if that could prevent what he'd seen with his own eyes. The pain in Toshinori's side worsened. The only thing he could cling to keep himself from blacking out was Mirai's voice. I'm here because I want to help you, Toshinori. Then stay by my side. Toshinori gritted his teeth and took another step forward. Toshinori! He couldn't bear to look back at Mirai or he felt he'd become undone. If you go on like this you'll fight a villain and meet a death too gruesome to describe. So this is his fate then. If that's to be my future, I will keep running forward to the finish line. He breathed out painfully, and save as many as I can before. You can't save everyone. Mirai pleaded, gripping his sleeve tightly. Please, don't go. You can't save me, Mirai, no one can now, and you can't stop me from going. Toshinori knew he hit a nerve when Mirai's grip lessened. His words had come out with more venom than he intended, but he meant every word. He tried to take another step, but pain shot through his injury and Mirai was by his side before Toshinori could hit the ground. All Toshinori could do was let out a ragged breath and wait for the pain to subside as he leaned into Mirai. Please, I don't understand, Mirai begged, keeping him on his feet while he cupped his cheek with a hand, searching his eyes. You wish to fight to save everyone, why can't you do the same for yourself? It would be selfish of me to put myself before others. Toshi closed his eyes, resting a hand over his. Then be selfish, Toshinori. His voice was barely above a whisper. I can't do that anymore, Mirai. He finally opened his eyes and slowly pulled Mirai's hand from his cheek. Confusion flickered in Mirai's eyes as Toshinori let go of his hand and stepped away, distancing himself from him. He leaned back against the wall to support himself and rested a hand against his stomach. Perhaps it was a sign that my mark was destroyed. To mark an end to our. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Realization was sinking in and Mirai was shaking now. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. If things remain as they are, with our ideals so different, we can no longer continue forward. Together. Toshinori closed his eyes. Stop, Mirai clenched his fists. You are going somewhere I can't follow. If you want to stay, then stay. Toshinori said quietly, If you want to go then, I'll go. Toshinori's eyes widened and he immediately regretted his words when he saw the tears were streaming down Mirai's face. But what unsettled him most? The vacant look in his eyes that bore into his soul. No, this isn't what he wanted. I will keep fighting for the life you wish to give up so easily. Mirai continued, his voice almost emotionless. It scared him. Goodbye, Toshinori. The moment Mirai was gone and Toshinori collapsed, his physical and emotional pain had become too much for him to bear. When he finally awoke, he was in a daze and instinctively reached for a hand that was no longer there to take his. He closed his fist slowly, gripping the bed sheets tightly. You're a stubborn fool. Torino called out when he noticed he'd finally woken up. Toshinori said nothing and didn't have the strength anymore to keep the tears from falling. Torino couldn't find it in himself to say anything else and moved to sit beside the boy he'd taken in as his own. Toshinori tensed when Torino rested a hand on his head and he looked up at him surprised with tear-filled eyes. That's it, let yourself grieve for once, Toshinori. Torino sighed softly, running his fingers lightly through his hair. If you keep trying to smile all the time, that smile will only become a mask you hide behind. Toshinori said nothing and only clung onto him tightly. Torino sighed weakly and returned the embrace. Tears pricked at the edge of his eyes. It was difficult to see such a ray of hope lose so much and hit rock bottom. After that day, neither Toshinori or Mirai had attempted to contact one another. Days slowly turned to months, then eventually years. There were times where Toshinori had moments of weakness, where he wanted to call, just to hear his voice again, but fell short. And now that he'd finally crossed the barrier, even by mistake, he had no idea what to do. Toshinori couldn't help but wonder what any of what Mirai said in the voicemail meant. It could have been nothing, but nothing would have been not bothering to call back and leave a message at all. He gripped his side tighter before he replayed the voicemail, if only to hear his voice. I'm pathetic. Toshinori thought bitterly. Why couldn't he just let him go? He was the one to push him away, he had no one but himself to blame. Mirai deserved happiness and love he could no longer give him. After how things were left off between them, Toshinori felt couldn't be that person for him, not anymore. Now, all Toshinori could hope for was Midoriya's story would end happier than his. I'm sorry.